right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming on this beautiful, Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening. My name is Laura Darendinger, and I am one of the co-leads, along with Angela Arsenault and about 6 or 7 of us other volunteer parents across the state. We co-lead a 100% volunteer coalition called VT-IRL, which has 2 meanings. A lot of people know the current day vernacular of in real life, but what it really stands for is independence, reconnection, and liberation. That means independence from any corporate entity or funding that could compromise and create bias, real or perceived, and how we interpret the research to support policies. Reconnection is to help communities reconnect and do events and things together in person. And then liberation is, the L stands for liberation from the foregone conclusion of assumed use of digital products. So that's what IRL really stands for. But what we really came together to do, we were the same parents that drafted the original phone and social media free school bill. So a couple years ago, we called ourselves the Coalition for Phone and Social Media Free Schools. But we did that, and so that's great, yay. And so we had to come up with another name, so that was the name. And as we'll talk about today, I am a public health nurse by background, so that's my lens, that is my bias. My bias is how to see the world through the lens of public health, and how do we support environments that are healthy environments, and how do we look at product exposure and try and mitigate that if it is a health harming product. I'll drop that word in and Angela can follow up on that term, health harming product. And so that's why we came together here. This is our first time doing the candidate forum. So thank you, the 4 of you, for being the guinea pigs here with us. Angela's a pro though, so I'm not worried. I just did the background logistics. So I will now introduce Representative Angela Arsenault, who will take it from here.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I've had a couple of opportunities, I guess, to thank Laura publicly, but I feel like I can't miss a single opportunity to do that. So I just want to say thank you so much, Laura. Laura is one of the fiercest advocates I have ever met, and incredibly knowledgeable. And I think that, as she said, brings this public health experience and background to this work and to her advocacy. And we all, and I mean that all of us in the state, all of our kids are better for it and for Laura's tireless work. So thank you very much. And thank you all for being here. My name is Angela Arsenault, and I want to thank each of our guests here tonight. And we're going to start with, I'd say, just about a minute or so introduction from each of you. I think it's important for us to know who we all are and what we're doing here. So I'd like to pass it down the line, I guess. Do you want to get us started?
I'd love to. Well, first of all, it feels good to be back home, as always. I'm from South Burlington. My name's Javin Sears. I'm actually a 2020 grad from the South Burlington High School right down the road. I've actually been in South Burlington since I was 8 years old. I was originally born in St. Albans. Most of my family's still living there, but me and my mom live here. And I also help run a nonprofit youth football program that we're entering our 60th year, the South Burlington Dolphins, which is held at South Burlington, JC Park, right over there. And I'm also been at UVM. I study business, and I've also been part of the Lawrence Debate Union there for the last 2 years, roughly. And we talk about a lot of policies and whatnot. And that's kind of originally what got me into politics. So I'm a 24-year-old. I'm running for the Republican Party here. And why I'm running is because I'm extremely concerned that Vermont is heading in the wrong direction and has been heading in the wrong direction. And I think we can kind of see that with the outcomes of a lot of our institutions, but also just our state in general. And that, that's why I kind of wanted to step up up and run. And I'm really just extremely worried, especially when it comes to young people. So I'm here right now. I wanted to be here because I think this is a really important topic, especially when it comes to young people who are almost non-existent in this state, unfortunately. And so people like me who get out of college, they usually go elsewhere. They don't even stay here in this state. And it's unfortunate, but I think it does have to be fixed. And I know I'm over a minute, so I will move on.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Hunt, and I am here as a candidate for Chittenden County Southeast State Senate, mainly here as an advocate for children, young people, lifelong learning, and talking about important topics in groups like this. I have 3 kids, 13, 16, and 18, and I'm a pediatrician, so I work with children and young adults across the spectrum. I listen to them. I watch trends. I've been doing it for about 20 years. And in particular, germane to this topic, I like to talk about when it's a good idea to utilize physical boundaries, recommendations, infrastructure to keep kids safe, keep kids stimulated, and keep them safe from exposures that could affect their safety, well-being, and in relationship with education and feeling like they can do anything, anytime. So I was one of the physicians who supported the phone-free schools bill publicly, which was quite unpopular because, as you might have noticed, we're all being watched or massaged or exploited by big companies like Meta these days. And so they have a high financial stake in our educational system across the board. And so I learned a lot from that work and felt very inspired, and I'm really proud of it. So with the coming of the school year, thinking about kids having those physical boundaries and having their brains and bodies engaged with their community makes me really, really excited. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. My name is Thomas Chittenden. I am a currently serving state senator and a candidate for re-election this cycle. I'm over in the Democratic primary, but it's great. And I promise Javin, if I appear on a stage with him again, I will wear a tie. So I'm sorry that I didn't wear a tie tonight, Javin. You look sharp, and I usually default to the tie, and I should have worn one. So again, I live here in South Burlington. The citizen legislature is part-time, so my full-time job is at the University of Vermont, where I actually teach in the Grossman School of Business. So that's my primary focus. But as we have part-time citizen legislatures, I like to keep myself busy. Before I was in the Vermont State Senate, I served on South Burlington City Council, was there for 8 years, and I also was on the Green Mountain Transit Board. I was the chair of that. I just recently, because I had a little free time, so I just volunteered, and now I'm appointed to the South Burlington School Board. I wanted to see, they had an opening, and I've been familiar with them because I was part of the superintendent search. So I'm going to serve on the school board for the next 7 months, just to really feel firsthand the conversations, the critical conversations about how much we're spending on our schools and what's happening in our schools with our kids. And I couldn't see a better way to do that than to spend 2 Wednesdays a night between now and next March and just really diving into those topics. On this topic, I will say this. This is my 12th election, and I've been to lots of forums, but this is the only forum I think I can remember with such a specific focus. So I didn't know what I was walking into tonight, and I just want to level set and say I am not an expert on this area. I have done preparation, so I do have notes. That's what I like to do, and a lot of these notes are like what other countries are doing, what other states are doing, as well as some statistics. And what I'll say is, in my prep today and earlier this week, this is a serious concern. The Vermont Department of Health has very clear statistics showing that kids that spend more than 5 hours a day on screens have much worse, serious mental health problems. So this is absolutely paramount of concern, and I look forward to more solutions. We need to address it. I think this visual, I won't steal your thunder, is going to really make a strong corollary for us to attend to this topic. I'm sorry, I've already started to steal your thunder, but now they're really intrigued by what this is, and I've already gone over a minute. So I look forward to this discussion, and I hope to learn more than I talk tonight, because again, this is an evolving topic, and I don't have all the answers, but I want to talk about them and learn about them.
Can I get another minute? No.
Thank you. We're all here to learn and be in community and learn in community. So we'll go to Senator Lyons. Hi, Jenny.
Good evening. Thank you for accommodating my Zoom in. I greatly appreciate it. I'm helping out my daughter who had overnight medical appointments. So I need to be here taking care of things for her. Having said that, I am Ginny Lyons. I am a sitting senator. I chair the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. A little bit about my background, I think, that is relevant to what we're looking at tonight, not the least of which is how much I enjoyed working with Angela Arsenault on the phone free schools last session. It was exciting work, and I was really pleased that our committee could support that legislation. My own background is in the area of the biological sciences, and as well as doing some interdisciplinary work with folks in psychology and social work. One of the things that I did do that's relevant to tonight is I established the first drug and alcohol program in the state of Vermont through a grant that then became the underlying curriculum that went to UVM and other colleges across the state. I continue to work on prevention. It's one of the things that I'm passionate about, knowing that I've done research in with tobacco, trying to get, one of the problems with prevention is you need to know what level are we preventing and how can we do it effectively. And I might talk about that a little bit later. I'm also very keen on what you folks are diving into. This is not an easy task. It's going to be exciting. I think we work in the Senate all the time to deliver public health outcomes through the policies that we write. We have put in place a chief prevention officer for the state of Vermont, and we work very closely with our Department of Health and others. So thank you all for having me here tonight, having all of us here tonight. I look forward to your questions and this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you all for those wonderful introductions. And I just wanted to share with everyone, including folks up here, how I see this going. And what happens in reality could be very different. But the idea is, because this is it's a really broad topic in a lot of ways, and so I think that's why we wanted to get really specific and look at this issue, the issue of what we will refer to as digital addiction. And I acknowledge there are, let's say, reasonable minds can differ kind of situation where some people are saying it's not technically addiction or it absolutely is. We're going to use that term because we are talking about addiction and addictive behaviors, addiction-like behaviors, and we're talking about public health. So I think it's quite relevant and apropos here. And so we all have this pre-read, an article titled "Digital Addiction is a Public Health Problem. Is Public Health Law the Solution?" This was just a suggested pre-read. So I was thinking we'd use this as a baseline. If you haven't read it, that's okay. I'll just maybe bring a few points forward that are made in this article, and we'll just use that as a sort of baseline touch point kind of thing for our discussion, since I suspect it could go in many directions. But we'll also let it be a little free-flowing. So unlike a lot of candidate forums, I didn't want to just ask a question and then let each person answer the same question over and over. I know as a candidate, if you're the one going last, you're always like, oh, everyone's going to say what I was going to say, and then it's going to sound like I'm just saying what everyone else said. And it's this very weird dynamic that I don't know if it serves us very well. So I thought maybe we would have a conversation.
Sounds like politics to me.
We're going to have a conversation. So, and then we're also going to save some time at the end for expanding the conversation into the audience, and a conversation among all of us. I think in our preliminary conversation up here, we'll talk about identifying the challenges and the problem that we're facing. But then we'd like to have a bigger conversation to talk about solutions. I think there's no shortage of good ideas out there, and hearing all of your ideas would be really fantastic in terms of like what you'd like to see our state do to tackle this problem. So I'm going to look to Laura for some help with timekeeping. When we have about 20 minutes left, you can wave your arms at me and I'll know that means we're going to wrap up here and open it up to the audience. So with that, any questions from our guests? Everyone cool with the round table-ish discussion? We don't have a table, so I was picturing, last night there was a housing forum in this very same room. So again, a very specific topic, but also wide-ranging. So I wanted to start by talking about one aspect of this article. Again, digital addiction is a public health problem. Is public health law the solution? Something that I find really interesting is that, and this article points to it as well, that so far in our efforts, in Vermont, as Laura mentioned, we did pass our phone and social media free schools bill last year. And we also passed what is called the age appropriate design code. So that's going into it. They're staggered implementation dates, but it's in effect January 1st, I believe. Do I have that right? 2027. And that will set some parameters for the design of specific products that are likely to be online products that are likely to be accessed by children. Both of these laws, as I just explained, are really targeted at young people. And so I just wanted to open up our conversation and hear from all of you about if you think that's a good idea. Is there a reason to focus our efforts on young folks? Should we be expanding it to talk about, when we say age-appropriate design code, is there an age at which it's appropriate for products to be designed to be addictive? I don't think so. I'd love to hear what you all think about that, about this sort of, I don't want to call it a tactic, strategy maybe, about starting with young people.
Can I just make a public service announcement for the parents in the room? There's a box with Matchbox cars, Magnetiles, and Legos over there if anyone has kids.
Angela, am I on?
I would.
You're unmuted, Ginny.
Good. Javin, go ahead, but I'd like to chime in just a little bit, but after you go.
Okay. Well, I just want to first off say I'm a little jealous. You got the whole screen up there.
Yeah, there you go.
Got the whole wall. Oh gosh. Anyways, I love this question, and being able to talk about it's also just a great opportunity to be here. So thank you, and thank you as well. Here's what I think when it comes to, I guess this is my debate background, but with this question that is kind of asked of us when it came to this forum is talking about, is basically, is digital health or digital addiction a public health crisis? So my argumentations kind of be framed a little around that. I think that in a way it is, but this if you haven't read this, I actually really recommend reading this, but where this kind of this litigation, this mass litigation that is going against the big tech companies when it comes to these social media companies and products that are being used, the litigation when it comes to the successful litigations that have won, like the suits and the lawsuits, really comes down to the question not necessarily about the design of the actual algorithm and the scrolling, the auto scrolling, or the content moderation, the algorithm that is personally designed. It actually kind of comes down to, I think, if I'm reading this correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, but not necessarily the design, but the acknowledgement and transparency of the companies to acknowledge the harms that could come along with it, which I think where these successful lawsuits have won in court cases, for example. And now I should have, firstly said, I think this is an issue that young people are obviously dealing with. I mean, I was in class and in 2018, I was saying this to somebody earlier. I remember, people were on their laptops playing Fortnite in class when it first came out. I know that's not social media, but similar kind of concept in gaming is can be covered up in the same way. But you know, I just so when it comes to this, I think it's also important. I think that, you know, one thing that I think technology companies have to do and should do, and they should be held to be accountable, is that they have to make that transparency very, very clear. And I think the reason what we're seeing of a lot of these companies that are being, you know, acted against is because some of them were not doing that. Now, I didn't go further deeper into my research into like, okay, what exactly aren't they doing? This could be very complicated in this stuff. But I think the question does come down to that. And, you know, and I'm going to talk later about like, okay, user agency, obviously this is, you know, people that are obviously using this, how much should we push back on that? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but I at least wanted to get that framing out there so people know when they pick that up, you know, where this conversation, at least from my perspective, is kind of coming from. So I'll leave it to you, Ginny.
Yeah. So listen, I think, Angela, when you asked the question, you alluded to, is it just kids or are there others? And I want to expand our thinking a little bit, because I think the article allows for us to do that. And that is that an older population that becomes more and more isolated, as we saw during COVID. I think COVID was kind of the height of awareness about people being isolated, alone, home, and then becoming very much attached to the internet and to whatever was there. And that, I think, is what happens as we see older folks who are home, living alone, perhaps, and becoming very much attached and then, let's say, addicted to what they are looking at on the screen. So for me, it is not just the young folks, it's also the older folks. I've seen, and remember, we have a whole cohort of folks who are in their 40s and 50s who really didn't begin scrolling through the internet until later years. So maybe in their 20s, or maybe even their 30s. And some of those kids now are addicted. They sit with their telephone all the time. I sat with someone yesterday who is an older gentleman. We were having a conversation with four people, and he sat there with his phone. So when you say it's kids, the word for me for kids is, how do we prevent that child from becoming that older guy? You know, what is it that our technology companies understand about as the article said, the vulnerabilities of human psychology? They get it. They hire people to help them put these algorithms in place. They're making money on this. So yeah, so it's a broad spectrum of need out there, and understanding how to address different age groups. I won't talk more about that right now. There's so much embedded in this topic. And the corporations like Meta, who lost that lawsuit, the most extreme effect that we saw approaching suicide. I mean, you know, we cannot have that. We need to prevent that. But at the same time, preventing the intellectual loss, preventing the social skills and the social ability that we see for folks when they dive into the world of the internet in an addictive way. So I'll hold my thoughts for now.
Yeah, and I'll just take this opportunity to share with all of you, and then I'll head to you, Dr. Hunt, that there's this great book. It's one of many up here on the table to take a look at. It's called Attensity, a Manifesto of the Attention Liberation Movement, written by a collective called the Friends of Attention. You can see I'm only about halfway through, but what this book is about is the concept that their manifesto is based on the premise that big tech and, you know, social media and certainly AI companies, it's the same business model, are fracking our brains. So think about that for a second, what you know of fracking in the energy sector. It's the same concept how the design of these products is such that they, as I think Ginny was saying, well-paid, very smart scientists and behavioral scientists and researchers had a hand in designing these products, and they're reaching to our brainstem to steal our attention and focus. And ultimately, you were saying, Ginny, to really either dilute or replace our human bonds and relationships.
A bit scary.
Yes.
It is. It dehumanizes us when that happens, regardless of what the content is. So, all right.
I would say it doesn't have to be that way. I'm a very big picture thinker, and I work with children and have over time. And so I'll give you one statistic and we can break it down. As of now, in United States universities, over 50% of many classes have special accommodations for test taking because they have attention deficit diagnoses or some sort of 504 or success plan. And that does, in my opinion, a disservice to the individuals who are truly disabled and who really need success plans to thrive. And much of the attention deficit spectrum comes from that guy right there, that little plastic Chromebook there and the smartphone. Another very alarming statistic that caught my eye before the pandemic, and Surgeon General Vivek Murthy also was very proactive with educating the public, was that the graph of emergency department visits for attempted suicides was perfectly superimposable on the graph of iPhone releases. I have it, I keep that in like my files to show people. And so there are 24 hours in a day, and most people want to cultivate young minds and bodies with all that time. So to step back and look at the big picture, educators, parents, community leaders, coaches, mentors, spiritual leaders, we all want the best for the common good, and that includes nurturing our young people. Absolutely. Relating to nature, getting out in the fresh air, learning through failure, using your hands, talking to people, being part of a community. If we fill the 24-hour day with as much of that as possible, we become smarter and we become stronger and we see less pathology in our young people. I could go on, but I want to give other people time. I see all these forces because the corporations are in it for the money. All those other subpopulations I mentioned are in it for the future. And I think we should count ourselves among those because we're here today.
I'll bring it back to the question I think you framed and maybe build off of some of the points Dr. Hunt just made. I was at one of my oldest 7th grade parents' night at middle school, and Mr. Wolf, in South Burlington, science teacher, said something, and it stuck with me. It's one of my mantras, and he said, "Prepare the child for the path, not the path for the child." And I agree with that when it comes to parenting, but the government has a role to make the path safe for everybody, to reduce traffic accidents, to make it so that people can get to and from without colliding with each other, and to make sure that they're running vehicles that aren't going to rip the road up. So the government, just like with tobacco, I'm stealing more of your thunder, just like with our airwaves, just like with our television broadcasting and the Federal Communications Commission, we have a role to play in making digital devices safe. And I think we should be proud of what Vermont has done. We are doing and focusing on this. The Kids Code is passed. We're enacting it. We passed a privacy law. I know there's a lot of debate there. We didn't go far enough, but it is a base that we can build on. And it's got 18 months of implementation. I know whoever's sitting there next year is going to build on what we did this past session. So we've got the right balls moving forward. I do think there's things that we could do. So I don't want to segue too much into that, but I think it's part of the open conversation. New York and California are looking at really limiting times, so making it so that times of day for youth settings can't get notifications, so that phones behave differently. But one thing that I noticed Europe is doing, or at least pushing for, they have not yet passed it, but this is what thought leaders in this space in Europe are advocating for. And this is where I don't know how much Vermont can have pressure on it, but we have voices and we can amplify those, hopefully with a more functioning federal government after this fall, but we won't talk politics there. But I do think that we should press the designers of the phones, so that's Google, iPhone, Apple, to have the youth modes. My kids, they use apps, and I'm guilty of every now and then when they have to be able to do something, I'm like, all right, let me just get on there and I monitor it. But I still know that there are things that they're getting because that app or that phone isn't treating them as a child. So they want the devices to have a hard youth mode where everything would have to check with that. And that could do a lot for it. And then I've already used up too much time. There's other things from Europe that we could talk about with kidfluencers and the right to offline recreation and so on.
Oh, yeah.
But I'll stop there.
France has a great kidfluencer bill. It's actually illegal in France to basically exploit your child as an influencer on social media. But thank you for bringing up, moving like solutions. And I wonder what you all think about, and I'll just spell out the sort of motivation behind that first question I posed is, what do you think would happen in our state legislature if we were proposing bills like Kids Code that applied regardless of age? Smart design. Because if we're here to talk about tackling this problem as a public health issue, are we not concerned with the health of all Vermonters, regardless of age? I'm just curious, speaking as someone who's introduced many of the bills that pertain only to young people, it's something I think about all the time. And I can think of a few reasons. I know, I can explain why I've gone the route that I've gone, but I'm really curious to hear from you all if you think there would be the political will to tackle this for all Vermonters.
I kind of wanted to push back on Tom. I love Tom, but I do want to push back on what he said, kind of in this, and related to this question. Because when I was reading this, I did sense, I'm going to be honest here, I did sense some bias in what this question is asking of us, because I feel like there is a subtle implicity saying that in this question of should this be a public health crisis? It's kind of almost implying that without saying, should the government get involved? And I can continue, and exactly what Tom just said is that, the government's role is to make it safe. The government should be and I don't mean to go on you too hard, but just in general I think, what we kind of see in our politics in general, because I'm a small government guy. I mean, just because I represent the Republican Party, it doesn't really matter. The fact is, I've seen government intervention in so many different ways because it says it's going to make it safer, it's going to make it better. I could talk about our whole entire public education system in a lot of different ways in that sense. But just kind of on this specifically, because we haven't seen we have seen what the harms are with social media in general, but I think we do got to be careful when we talk about government intervention, because this is why I talked about this litigation that is going on and holding technology companies accountable. How are we going to do that? Well, I think a lot of people, not from my party, are going to say that we should have government intervention. We have these bills, X, Y, and Z to do this, keep whatever. But I can definitely say, just from this article alone, it actually does prove that technology companies, we were just talking about this right before, is that they're succeeding with litigation, and it's not with lawsuits to hold them accountable. For example, I don't know what the exact settlement was, but Meta and YouTube just got sued for multiple millions of dollars that it's probably going to then eventually force them with this mass litigation to actually have to change their product and do more transparency so they don't get sued again, because they will if they don't. And so what is this litigation actually coming from? Well, it's not coming from the government. It's coming from individuals, parents, families, plaintiffs who are unhappy with the outcomes that they are seeing with these technology companies. And that is actually a good method that is going to actually hold these tech firms accountable. But I think when we get into the conversation about, hey, we got to get the government involved, I always take that with an asterisk, because that is not what the government was originally designed to do. to have this mass force, which I think is what is causing Vermont a lot of problems, is because it's trying to be way too bold, way too large to say we can tackle these issues and promise you that we're going to do that. Which I will definitely tell you, if you tell a kid to put down a cell phone in class, well, 9 out of 10 times they're going to find a way to get it out, and that's not a great analogy. But I can definitely, and it is a problem. Especially for young people. And I work with young people. I coach 5th and 6th graders. And when I saw what COVID did to young people that were in my community, and I had to deal, I don't like to say deal, I had to coach and help inspire them, give them good values, is that I saw there was so much destruction that happened. It was hard for them to communicate in a lot of ways. Their social tendencies were a lot different. This is all because they weren't necessarily in school, or they were on their phones 24/7. And how do you fix that? Well, I don't think giving away the phones is necessarily going to fix that. I think actually, getting out and getting on a sports team is one of those things. Having more time at home with your family, and obviously during COVID, that's really hard because people got to work, obviously. But that kind of goes to my whole framing of we got to be careful when we talk about government intervention, because you look at our state, there's a lot more problems that I think we need to slow down on the regulations and cut back rather than increase. So don't mean to steal any of your guys' fire, but that's just my opinion. So.
Can I just respond? I think what you're saying about COVID era dramatic social change comes because our population was told to be very afraid, very isolated, and heavily dependent on technology. And that was unprecedented biologically for the human brain. And so the best we can do is learn from it and be better for it. And I'd say some of that should be in statute. And I think when you use the term government, Javin, I don't know if you mean the Attorney General or the Attorneys General of the 14 states who had taken
41. If you're talking about this article.
Oh, no. I'm talking about Attorney General Clark and her colleagues who just actually made it through a rejected appeal by the Supreme Court in May, I think, for the YouTube and Meta lawsuit. So there's still gas in that tank, and that is, I think, a good use of the advocate's pulpit, and it comes from being in touch with community, not overbuilding government might. It's standing up for Vermont's people. I think are you guys following that? Yeah.
Well, also there was 41 in this article directly that you'll see. There was actually 43, I think, actually, states attorney generals who actually were also part of the mass litigation lawsuits that happened down. But it was also, it's a combination of 2,200 others. So that's a lot of other people who were also suing when it comes to, trying to hold these tech companies accountable, just to be clear. But, I think, state has to play a role in some way. But I just wanted to say we got to be careful.
Angela, can you repeat your question?
I was just wondering if you think there's political will in our state to tackle this as a public health issue for all Vermonters of all ages. And I will just say, the lawsuits that are succeeding are only succeeding because the companies are being proven to have broken the law, which comes from the government. Just saying.
Well, they were proven to not be transparent.
That's difficult when you start.
Okay.
Who's talking?
You are.
All right. Thank you. We were getting into a little debate there, and that's good. I think it's important to have differences of opinion, because that's the only way you understand what we need to know. We don't know what we don't know. And so going to your question about political will, that is always a tough one. Let's use using tobacco and vaping as an example. We had a bill that was just nearly over the line to eliminate flavored vapes that was causing huge problems with kids. And it didn't go. And it didn't go because the political will was not quite at the line. When you try to do the extreme, and I think this is what Thomas was talking about earlier with the bill that we passed this year, when you try to do everything, you accomplish nothing. So it is really important that we take some steps I think first, there are a number of folks out there who do not see the use of this technology in any way as addictive. So, number one is, how can we develop and identify and educate ourselves around the outcomes, the addiction outcomes, or the use of these social media giants and their products? How can we demonstrate that what's happening to kids, and in particular 18 to 22-year-olds, they're the ones that have been identified in this article, 40% uh, going in and overusing. So what are those outcomes? What kind of data do we need to inform ourselves? And that informs policymakers. We don't have to pass a bill about everything, but we certainly have to pass laws that are going to regulate what large corporations can do in our state. Otherwise, we'll continue to be overrun. One of the worst things that's happened to us is Citizens United. That's large corporations unleashed donations across the country. Similarly, if Meta or other organizations are allowed to flood the market with products that keep everyone online all the time, or more than they're socializing or playing ball or hiking, uh, we need to know that. And so measuring uh, what we need will help to build the political will that we need in order to define the the right policies and right solutions. So we're in the beginning of all of this. I know some of you guys, you're already down the line and down the path. But if we think we're going to make hay on and make progress, we're truly at the beginning of making change.
Yeah.
And not every change is going to be the result of a law. So we're all in it.
That's a great point. And I wanted to get to you, Senator Chittenden, and I'll just say, when folks have a chance, maybe after we conclude, anyone's welcome to come up and look at this timeline that Laura has created, probably with the assistance of some teenagers who aren't in here anymore. This lays out the fight to regulate tobacco. And as Jenny was saying, you can look at 1964 as was when the first Surgeon General's warning came out. And it was only in 2019 that we raised the age for tobacco purchases to 21. And of course, a lot of steps along the way. So we might be looking at a similar timeline. I hope not, because the technology is moving a lot faster than that. But
So my comment's very similar to that. Progress made in the courts is usually terribly inefficient, and it's the courts trying to keep up with the technology and the changes, applying laws that were passed decades ago, before there was artificial intelligence, before there was Android phones in everybody's pockets. So regulations, I agree, it's not about more regulations, it's not about less regulations, it's about the right regulations. And regulations are often very static, and they get stale quickly. So what we need to do is update our perspective, our lens, our values on making the roads safe, and looking at how we can reduce the amount of lawsuits where these things are fought in the courts. I'd also say that what I took from the article too is that they're resting a lot of the tech companies are resting a lot of their arguments to do this on the First Amendment rights, saying you can't regulate content, and that's how the precedent has been set. But what we can do is regulate design and intent and the actual platforms themselves. And that's what we've done for ages. That's what we did with television, with radio, with cigarettes, with pharmaceuticals. So I hear it, and that's the fundamental debate we have in the State House and over the kitchen tables about what's the role of government. And I would always fall on the path that it's not about more regulations. I don't want the government regulating every part of our lives. I just want the government to do the right regulations to address emerging concerns and safety issues throughout every facet of our lives. Not saying I want them in every facet of our lives, but when emergencies come up and people are interested, look, 25 people showed up tonight. How many people are watching online? This is an issue of concern, and we need to address it because it's a new space.
And Representative,
I think I just did introduce this. I want to get to the audience proposals, questions, solutions, and I think you might have just segued us into that space, Senator Chittenden, by talking about making these products safer and looking through this public health lens. And interestingly, all of the bills that we've passed so far in Vermont, apart from the phone and social media free schools bill, which was in the education committee, we've mostly been going through our commerce committees in both the House and Senate, Commerce and Economic Development, and dealing with this as a consumer protection issue, because that's really what it is. These are products, and yes, they're trying to claim First Amendment rights, but they are products that can legally be regulated just as pretty much every other product out there is. So do you want to
Can I just say, if we use the economic lens alone, looking at worker productivity, healthcare expenditures for mental illness, and even the three quickest growing cost sectors in our educational funding debate are special ed, transportation, and health insurance for teachers. So if special education, so financial economic survival alone is another conduit to look at this, I would say.
Absolutely. So the idea now is for us to open this up to requests and questions and suggestions. What would you all like to see as in the form of legislation, or maybe we can talk about, to not solely focus on government regulation. I'm really interested in changing social norms, and how can we individually and collectively shift the norms around these products, the use of these products, as everything is now accelerating with artificial intelligence. And what Laura said earlier about the presumption of use, there's no friction anymore. There's really this assumption that once it's created, once this new technology is created, we shall all adopt it, embrace it, use it, learn it, love it. And that's what's led to the harms that have happened already. So I wonder does everyone have something to write with and on? So does anyone want to, this is the fun part. If you can't tell, do you have a question? Okay, I was gonna say one thing about VT-IRL and a play on words. This is our scroll. And we're going to take your suggestions. I know, it's a finite scroll, and we're going to post your suggestions on the scroll. I feel like I should. So I can hold this, or I can lay it over here if you want to grab folks' posts, and we can have our discussion. Any suggestions up here? Who wants to get us started? Oh, I want to go to your question. Here.
I'm too close to the, might be too close.
So are we gonna? Okay.
One of my concerns is, when tech started coming in, I have kids that are about your age and a little bit older, so I got to watch this whole thing come in. Now I homeschooled my kids, so they weren't in the school system.
Can you use a microphone?
I was going to repeat for you. We're getting some feedback when the microphone is out in the audience, but yes, the answer is yes. Hold on one moment.
So I guess one of my concerns, my biggest concern is that, when I watched tech come in, and I contacted the principal of CVU at that time, and I wrote a big letter saying this is a huge concern.
Please don't allow this in the classroom. It's going to affect kids' development. His response was, this is what we're doing. It's the world we live in, and this is good for them. I totally disagreed. I had many conversations with him. He would not listen. I think, it's fine to make a law, but this is all in hindsight. And I think the tobacco thing is a perfect example. People who were paying attention knew that smoking wasn't good for you to begin with. Oh, okay. It just keeps making noise. People who were paying attention to what they knew inside were able to know my lungs don't feel as good no matter what the doctor says. People who are following what the doctor is telling them isn't. They're not paying attention. I think it's the same way in the school district. So as long as we're talking just about making laws, it's always going to be in hindsight. It's always going to be far too late. And this kind of thing here, our kids are laying down brain development right now. And they're going to be laying that down until, they're 28, 29 years old. So the difference between an older person and a child is that we are impacting the way their brains are developing. And that is huge, huge, huge. I guess my question then would be, technology is changing so quickly that if this takes this long to regulate, our kids are lost. They're completely lost. We're going to lose generations of kids. So what are the opportunities to impact and to teach about brain development, to teach and just to honor people's intuition so that they're listening to themselves without having the law there, because by the time the law is made, it's too late.
First of all, I love your
Can I close?
question. And well, two things. I think there's two things that I love about that. One, homeschooling. Two, I will also just want to build off of what you said. You said that, hey, this is an issue before these kind of companies ever came into play. These social media algorithms were even a thing. We already had a lot of these social issues. Now, would it be a better argument to say that a lot of these corporations have, benefited off of that? Well, you can say yes in a lot of ways when it comes to young people like me. I'm 24. I'm still having to deal with a lot of these, these algorithms that are personally catered toward me. But I think we should go back and say, like when Facebook first came out with Mark Zuckerberg, that didn't exist, this algorithm or anything like that. They just wanted to connect people in general. But also the fact is that, we have to solve these root causes. And I don't think the root causes are social media in general. Now, I would also say that maybe the social media, companies, have they benefit off it? I think we have realized, I think we should use social media almost as like a benchmark, as a tool to acknowledge, if someone is being like addicted on these platforms, there are other causes that are coming from that prior. And it's unfortunate that, that people are just getting sucked into the system. And, really the question does come down to the First Amendment. Is this user agency and I think we do got to be careful when it comes to the age and whatnot. But to talk about your experience, especially at CVU, I'm from South Burlington High School, and, not doing anything about it, I definitely feel for you. And I think that a lot of these issues, get solved sometimes outside of our school education system, whether at home, whether, in other forms of society, and promoting family values, strong, principles that are going to talk about, especially, I think it just comes down to personal responsibility, and definitely also discipline in general, because if you're not being taught personal responsibility in general, I think, that's going to be hard on other parts of society. So
I have a lot to say about that, and I am not the one who's supposed to be doing all the talking. So if there's anyone who wants to talk about personal responsibility when it comes to tools that are designed to addict you,
Well, what I'll say is
Please.
it's close to 7:30, and I know that's when a lot of people are setting this to be end, but I'm happy to stick around longer. And I just want to recognize Dave Zuckerman is in the room, and Dave knows this subject matter really well. And so I hope that he chimes in, and I want to hear his thoughts. I wish he was sitting up here with us. So I know we're coming up on, sorry, Dave, I had to call you out because I really respect you, and you've got some great opinions on this. But I would say to the speaker right there, the government moves slowly, and it's a design feature that we don't act too quickly, that we don't have kings or royalty decreeing things. So we are trying to catch up to the technology. So a lot of this, I would agree with what I just heard, that it rests on families trying to understand, parents, us looking at these things like the people that looked at the cigarettes. But we got to address it. We're working on it, and we got to study it. We need doctors and healthcare evaluating it.
I agree.
Well, a lot of what we're talking about is what I think Laura, who someone said, we need to look at our culture as a whole, and that begins with the decisions we make personally and as families. However, we do have a set of values that define our public health environment. So you can't leave it individual decisions. Sure, they're important, but they must be influenced if we're going to see results and outcomes that take folks away from addiction. Listen, everyone's using tobacco as an example. But if you go back and you look at the very beginning of tobacco, research demonstrated emphysema, cardiovascular disease, and all the horrible problems that result when you smoke tobacco. And nicotine addiction was actually secondary to that whole discussion. What happened was that the government said, well, we're not going to put a label on any of these cigarettes until start seeing cancer. So we start to see the extreme. So, but right now we're beginning to see elements of the extreme with the use of technology, digital technology. But we're also seeing a trickle in for some of the things that are negative effects, and which is why the the kids code, the work that was done, the phone free schools work that is done, that's just a beginning. Convincing folks that it's a problem is a beginning. I will say it is important that there's some latitude for how AI might be used in the curriculum. I think everyone carries around a little cell phone and a computer, and you say, gee, what year did the French Revolution end or start? And everyone grabs their phone and looks it up. But we're not talking about that. And we're talking about the effect on our psychology and on neurodevelopment. I couldn't agree with you more. That it is the kids who are going to be affected for the rest of their lives, and they're following the examples of older folks. So there's a lot. This is such a great topic.
And
But
I'd love to
we've
get
been
to a
here a
couple
long
more.
time.
Yeah, I'd love to get
It's
to a
good.
couple more audience questions. I know we have a question right there, and since I'm standing right here, do you have a?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond a little bit to the personal responsibility piece of it. As a parent who has no screens in the home, has never shown my kids any social media, they've been exposed to nothing until the day they got to public school. That's where they see YouTube. That's where they see advertisements. That's where they're exposed to Chromebooks. And all of those corporations are in our public schools. And no one asked us before they got there. And that's what I feel like I need help from the Senate to figure out why that is happening and to give us the opportunity to perhaps say, no, thank you. It's just in there now. That's part of the curriculum. That's part of their day every day. And I don't want it to be there. And I do everything I can at home, but it's the school that's funded by my tax dollars that is exposing them to that. So that's just the piece that I wanted to say.
I should definitely, respond because, I just got out of public school. I went through all public school, elementary, middle school, high school. But well, I'll just say, just to stick with the point of what you're talking about, is the fact is, I'm a big advocacy for parental rights. I think parents definitely have to have more of a say in this process, especially when it comes to digital addiction and what's going on social media. I think a lot of social media companies do have some forms of like parental mode, for example, X, Y, and Z. But the fact is, I think there could be more. And I think like just to give a kid a cell phone and you download Instagram or Snapchat or YouTube and you have no oversight into what is going on in that process. Like I didn't get a phone until I was a freshman in high school. My mom was like, "You are not getting a phone at all," until I got into high school, and that changed a lot for me. It took me a lot to kind of retract from a lot of those things that I was even given at that age, where you can say you're more mature, obviously not mature enough, because there's so many things that are out there online that you can just encounter or stumble upon. But the fact is that we don't have a system that is, really having a parent more involved in the process. And I think that's the same thing with public schooling in general a lot of the times. Whether if you want to go, because on my platform, I'm definitely saying, hey, when it comes to education, I know this is really off topic, but I will be quick. Is the fact is, as a parent, you don't have the right to say, I want my kid to go to Colchester or CVU, et cetera, if you live in a certain town. And I think that you should be able to do that. And I think there should be certain things that when it comes to like, especially social media use or parental things, oversight, when it comes to like these phones and stuff, we need to have more of a conversation with that. But anyways,
let's let that conversation be among the real parents, if you will. I think we have a question here.
We have a question, and I will say we have interstate school choice in high school. Just if you can get your kid there and you can pay tuition, your kid can go to pretty much any high school in Vermont.
Hi there. My name is Jason Van Drysch. I live in Burlington. I want to start just by circling back to, I think, a core piece of this that feels pretty foundational for me, that somebody alluded to, but it's worth really calling out, which is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. I read that somewhere. I didn't make that up, but it really stuck with me. I'm here partly because I care about this deeply. My daughter is almost 20, and we've been through all of this over the last 10 years. But also because I work for Front Porch Forum, and our mission is to help neighbors connect and build community. If we were on this sheet, you wouldn't see any of these in this box here. Our sponsors are Vermonters. The reason why I bring that up is because in the last session, the legislature considered a very strong data privacy bill. And Michael Wood-Lewis, our co-founder and CEO, testified in support of that strong version of the bill. The bill was subsequently gutted. A huge number of exemptions were carved out. Entire industries were essentially made exempt from the bill. The right to bring a lawsuit as a private citizen was taken out of the bill. A whole lot of other things were changed, and it essentially became a non-privacy bill that occupied the space where a privacy bill ought to be. And Senator Chittenden, I heard you say that you hope it's something we can build on. I think in some cases it's worse to pass a bad bill than to pass no bill at all, but I hope you're right and that we do build on it. And the reason why I think that's connected to the issue that we're talking about here is that privacy is fundamental, because the data that's being collected is absolutely vast, far beyond what anyone except for the extreme experts in this issue have any idea of. And it's the fuel, it is the oil that fuels the addiction and exploitation machine that is big tech. And essentially that data is power in our modern economy. So I think fundamental to addressing any of these issues that we're talking about is taking away power from these enormous companies, Data is their power. We have to withhold it from them. Otherwise, we're lost. So I would love to hear from the two sitting senators and then from candidates as well, how you feel about the fact that we went from a really strong, what would have been nationally leading data privacy bill to one that really is kind of a bit milquetoast and has a ton of exemptions in it. I'd love to hear where you'd like to go next with that and how.
Happy to go first, Senator Lyons. I will. Okay, so we did pass a bill that wasn't as strong as many advocates wanted. I am proud of the bill that passed, and I think it is a good start. There is more that we need to do. I will also say that the bill that you're describing, it did pass through the House and the Senate in the prior biennium, but it was vetoed by the governor, and there were not enough votes when there were supermajorities in both the House and the Senate to override it because of the concerns that were raised. So the bill that was being advocated, yeah, the House overrode it, but it failed in the Senate. Yeah, so it failed in the Senate for a variety of reasons that are yet to be unresolved, and those are regional consistency and the private right of action. Is the bill perfect? Absolutely not. Is there more that needs to be done? Yes. And I was of the mind that if we got nothing done, that would be hard for me to look in the eyes of our constituents and say we did nothing on data privacy. There is strength in what we passed, and it is something to build from. So I'm glad that we got something that the governor signed, and I know more work needs to be done. And I don't know everything, and if you disagree with my votes on those previously, I would welcome more conversations. That's what I try to do. I'm trying to educate myself. We have to vote on literally everything under the sun. I'm trying my best, and that's where I try to be very accessible, respond to emails, and I attend anytime I'm invited somewhere. When I show up when I'm not invited, it's just kind of weird. So, but if you invite me, I show up, so I'll be there. Senator Lyons?
Thank you. The relitigating the work that we did is really tough. And I agree, it would be great if we had the full bill. I, for one, would like to see a personal right of action in any bill that we pass related to this. I think that is absolutely key. Uh, and I also agree that we are not all experts on every single bill that comes out. We rely on the committee process. It is unfortunate that the bill you're talking about isn't as strong as folks would like. It's also unfortunate that the governor vetoes these bills. And so looking for another veto in the eye, that was the choice. Vote for this bill and then take the next step next session, or have nothing. So I think that's the response I can give you. It's probably not what you were hoping for, but I look forward to stronger legislation going forward.
I mean, I see children get exploited, speaking of the educational space, all the time for a profit. And whatever we can do as a community and as lawmakers to act, study, protect, and build on our strengths, we should be doing, because this is a ticking clock here, the evolution of a young brain. And I believe Representative Arsenault was it 650 where social media entities and AI have to register with the state? Did that pass? Because isn't that something that could be piggybacked a little bit with data privacy? Or
You're very close. 650 was an ed tech registry, and it did pass. It was attached as an amendment to our data broker registry update. So we are the first state in the country to require ed tech companies to register as such. They have to register anyway with the state just to do business in our state. And we're taking that first step. It is admittedly incremental, but they have to register and say that they provide ed tech services or products in Vermont, and they have to attest to following age-appropriate design code with those products, as well as federal laws and our student data privacy laws. So it's a first step. We're going to keep building on that one.
Well, and I think part of the thrust towards that passage was many national nonprofits have not found any net improvement in student outcomes when there is heavy use of ed tech. And so that was, we were talking about our culture of learning from community, hands-on experience, relationship with nature, our elders and what they have to show us and teach us. A lot of that's cultural, and that would be a way to keep government out of everyone's kitchen table, Javin. So we do that every day. I also, so as a candidate, I get asked a lot of like quick yes/no questions. One thing that keeps coming to mind in this space and also in healthcare, which as a primary care doctor, this is why I'm running, is processes. And so it feels like your experience with our now superintendent in CVSD, who's someone I've partners with, pardon me, but also your experience with public education is that the educators, the workers, the people who are doing the work don't necessarily have enough of a voice in a lot of the overarching decisions that then are carried down by the power brokers or whomever to the unit of measure, which is the student. And we see that in healthcare all the time. And that's something I'm really looking forward to in leadership is really getting educators at the table to see what works, how much coercion or shaming, whatever goes into accepting and folding in ed tech into your school community. So hopefully we'll open up conversations about the how, the what, the why.
Hi, my name is Melissa. I live in Burlington. I am a member of the school board, but I am also a member of the VSBA. We have an opening if you have an extra night. Here's my question to everyone present. If we continue on the trajectory of Act 73 in the course of your terms in office, every public education dollar will become a state dollar that is overseen by the legislature and the agency. Given that, what is the level of oversight you would need to feel comfortable for public dollars to go to funding devices that are largely being proven to be addictive and have addictive tendencies to minors without parental consent?
We're going to need another hour. I can take a stab at that if you'd like. I'm not jumping the gun. So one of my biggest concerns and why I did vote against Act 73 is because I think it would centralize all the decision making to Montpelier. I trust local community members more than I trust the 180 senators and House reps to know what's best for their communities. The motto of this state is freedom and unity. And if we were to go down the path of a foundation formula where local communities can't spend anything more than what the Montpelier dictates to them, that would be too much unity and not enough freedom, I like to say. So I don't want to see that happen. I do see merit in the conversations about more rationally structuring our governance of our schools, as we have done many times before. 119 school districts is indefensible. I think we need to have regionally comparably sized from both population, student population, voter population, and grand list comparable sized districts. That would allow for greater differences in how those communities with their elected boards prioritize those dollars, govern those dollars, and so that we can set parameters, some unity from the state government about how the dollars should or shouldn't be spent, but still allow some freedom by the local communities to decide where they think it needs to be spent most based on how they know their communities better than us. So I know I see Jerry. I want to have that coffee, Jerry. We got to talk about this some more. That's why I want to dive into this I'll buy the coffee and I'll buy the lunch, Jerry. So show me where I'm wrong. But that was my initial reaction to you, is I don't want Montpelier completely dictating that. And I see a role of school board.
So
I don't know what else to say to that, Jerry, but go ahead.
anyone else thoughts on on state dollars, purchasing products that are shown to have been harmful to young people?
For a little levity, I brought my son's Chromebook. That is one of 3 that he got. And this is what ends up happening to them. So, like I said about process, I don't want to answer that without a lot of educators helping me. But as a parent, I'm old school. I loved how I came up in the world, being born in 1974, hands-on, you know. We all like want to go back, right? But, right, Carrie? It's hard.
All right, I think you have a question, and then maybe we'll have time for one more.
I appreciate all the work that's been done with the cell phone bill and then with the kids code. I'm wondering how our legislature can regulate internet exposure in general in schools. I've been an educator in the state for over 30 years. I've worked in 3 or 4 different high schools and a middle school. I've seen the evolution of technology. I also have 2 children in school. Been to a couple of different school districts, and each school seems to have their own philosophy around internet exposure. I think there are some social norms, like we're not going to allow children access to pornography, and anything on that level is pretty much a legal social norm. But when it comes to schools allowing students to have access to the internet, I really do wonder how our legislature could step in and provide some guidance. I think different schools are employing different philosophies. I moved my family from one school district to another because that school district was allowing my high schooler to blow through his high school work and then watch Netflix or hockey for the rest of the class time, and no educator was intervening. As an educator myself, I will say having to intervene on that is really problematic and also stressful. Okay, I haven't had to do that for the last 7 years. I've had to do that. Before that, I didn't. And that really impacts my relationships with students. And it also impacted my parental rights and also my experience with my kids. I need my 2 children to graduate from high school ready to go on a path for career development. And I wasn't seeing that in the school district we were in. And nothing's perfect. In the school district I'm in, they still get access to the internet. They can still go on a video game. And the teacher is still, semi-responsible for that in the classroom, but there's no one that's going to come in and say, I'm noticing Johnny in the back there on a video game, and I'm going to hold you responsible. Our district is allowing that. Okay, they're allowing, and they'll say, I've complained, they'll say we only can do so much. They allow them to log into a personal email, and that's how they access a lot and the go around. And to Elizabeth's point, I grew up in the late 80s. We had the library. We had a curated set of books. We had encyclopedias. I didn't have Google. I didn't have the internet. I was fine. And we can do that. I'm going to give you a solution here instead of ask you a question. But when you have a learning management system like Google Classroom, anything I need my students to have, I can post in that classroom. Schools right now, most of them don't allow YouTube because of a lawsuit in the last several years. If I have to have my students access a YouTube video, I can post it in the classroom. I vetted that video. They can go and look at it. I can post an encyclopedic database, a career database, whatever it is where I need them to go and do their research. I can post that to the learning management system. I don't see the value of having the internet wide open. I don't see that as a fundamental human right for our children. And as a teacher, I find it's very, very hard to control, and it's not their fault because, again, that's an addictive or an attractive pull away from my direct instruction that I'm trying to provide. So getting back to my question, in addition to ed tech products, how can our legislature regulate the wide open internet and sort of form some guidance around what schools are actually doing?
I'm actually really appreciate your question. I might actually kind of have an interesting perspective that maybe most of my colleagues would, but just to talk about what actually products are, how they actually in school right now, and like especially in high schools, a lot of these high schools, like I can definitely tell you from personal experience, like a lot of people are trying to get onto a whole bunch of different sites, but I think the schools actually do a good job of, surprising I'm actually saying this, but they actually do a good job of actually I don't know how they do it, but they block certain websites, and of a lot of these, someone's nodding their head, they block certain websites from you being able to access. So there's actually a lot of these things that you're not allowed to go. You can't go on 123movies.com. You can't even go on Reddit. Obviously, yeah, YouTube is different, but they actually have within YouTube, it's like you can't necessarily log in, or it's kind of a little complicated. But they do actually surprisingly have good, and you can't use your VPNs are really not effective in the schools actually at all. These VPNs, virtual privacy networks, a lot of kids are so smart, especially the computer guys. They really know how to get around everything, but for some reason, the schools do a really good job of blocking that stuff. So I do want to push back on that specifically. But, and I think, maybe schools can do more actually on that side if there's certain websites that come up really quick because, to your point, technology or points that I've heard these people talk about that, the technology is advancing so fast. And how do we stay on top of it? It's really hard and it's really difficult. And just to acknowledge that at least, but also to give credit to schools to say they have fairly done a decent job on that front. Because I can definitely tell you. But the problem is you go home and you're given a laptop and maybe you can download a certain software and then get into the classroom and then use it. That's obviously different. Or they have a hotspot you use on your phone, for example. So there's a lot of different workarounds that we definitely have to talk. I don't think kids should be playing video games in schools. I mean, in classrooms. And unfortunately, that has been the case. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. My point is, how do we get around the workarounds?
Yeah.
I don't. School is school,
But
right, John? And I appreciate that. But I will tell you, I know this for a fact because I've worked with school districts and I've been a parent. Different schools have different philosophies and are blocking different things,
That might be true, and I wouldn't know that.
right?
Can I,
So,
can I interject just real briefly? I know I hear what you're saying, and you're talking about local decision making, and then we've also been talking about, why would we pass a law? Why don't we just let schools do what they want to do? And then on the other hand, I'm hearing exactly the opposite. And the one thing that we haven't talked about is the leadership role that the agency of education in the administration should be playing with this in particular. I mean, my experience with the AOE has been that it does not provide the guidance, the information, and the leadership to bring local districts together for this type of discussion. There is there a statewide policy that we could be putting in place that would help do exactly what you are doing? It sounds like you're doing a great job in providing information to your students without giving them full access to the entire world. But this is the kind of discussion that I find frustrating when the agency of education doesn't step in and provide the leadership role that they should. We can do it. All right, we can pass legislation. That's our job. But it would be so superior to have an organization like AOE bring you and others into a discussion and say, what is the policy going to be for K through 8? What is the policy for 9 through 12? What is the policy? So these are the kinds of things that sometimes become extremely frustrating.
I completely agree with Senator Lyons, and I see model policies that would be helpful. One of the problems we have is we have 119 school districts that vary in size, and so when you're talking about these micro districts and then supervisory unions and some with 200 kids and some with 3,000, it is hard for smaller schools to implement the same level of technology competence, and that's why I do think it's a valid discussion that we moved forward with the recent legislation to do what we've done in the past. We used to have, I think I just heard from the Vermont State Historian, 2,419 school districts up until 1878. We had one for every school. And then we passed a law that we made it for one per town. So we went down to about 219 or 200 some odd. It makes sense to start looking at our governance models so that school districts can have model policies that make sense with their economies of scale. That's one thing we can do.
And that is the approach we took with the phone-free schools legislation. It ended up being a model policy that the AOE produced in conjunction with educators and the Phone-Free Schools Coalition and others. So I'm hoping that we can move in that direction with EdTech as well. I'm going to go to Mr. Zuckerman and then one last question over here, and then I'll wrap us up.
David's fine, but thank you. I just want to point out afterwards, if anybody wants a cherry tomato, I brought 3 pints from the farm for a little unity after the event. So I'm 54, so 1971, Dr. Hunt, and I would say I've become addicted to my phone well beyond being exposed as a teenager or a 20-year-old, and I'm constantly working on it. However, I do have a daughter who did just turn 20 last winter, and I'm well aware, as many parents here, of some of the addictive issues. I want to point out that for those that care, there are very clearly is big tech money coming into Vermont political races. If you look particularly at Orange County and some other races, these are being impacted. VPO, Vermont Political Observer, just did an article about that. I wanted to point out a couple of other quick things. One is there are people out there that talk about parental rights that also say, my kid should be able to have a phone in the school because if something happens, they need to call me. So I just want to point out that parental rights is a two-edged sword. And so folks should be aware of that. I grew up, there was a phone in the classroom, and amazingly enough, if we really needed to call home, you would ask the teacher and you would call home for whatever that critical reason was, which had to be an actual critical reason. I think today's wants and needs, we could all talk about that. As far as community, having a voice as a parent, you have that with school board members. And I want to thank you for being a school board member because it's the most thankless job there is. But we do have a voice. We have democracy. We have that opportunity. We can use it. And I think we need to get more people to use that to influence our school boards. And the last thing I wanted to say is in reflection to what Senator Chittenden said. And he talked about a bill that was vetoed a couple of years ago, and the votes were not there. And this is a political comment. But the chair of that committee, who ushered that bill through, got up on the floor and gave a 20-minute speech, of which the first 2 minutes was about how she would vote for the bill. And then she spent 18 minutes talking about all the reasons one would find reasonable to vote against the bill, and actually argued to help the bill die, even though she was voting for it. And I'm sorry that she's not here tonight. I was not here at the beginning to understand why. But I think it's really important. I recognize there's a team slate, but they are individuals. And there is a very different opinion on data privacy and a different effort that was put in by a senator who is not here. And I think House members would confirm that.
Anyone? All right, we're gonna go over
Question,
here.
David.
Answer the question, but it's a tough topic, and we need to come back to it. And there's always more debate to be had, especially on an evolving space like this. So.
My head is swimming. I don't even know where to start, but I would like to ask Javin, what will it take to convince you this is a problem? You've heard from doctors, parents, teachers, school board members. It's a problem. From children to elders to people in between. And it's not just here, it's not in families, it's nationwide, it's worldwide. So I think there are no guidelines, there's no policy as to what schools can do. I know that is huge in the conversation. As a health problem, it isn't talked about in the doctor's office. It's not, you don't get enough sleep, you turn your phone off an hour before. What about the rest of the day that you're on your phone? You talk about how many drinks you've had, how many cigarettes you might have had. This is just as bad, if not worse, because everybody does it. It's socially acceptable. You can do it anywhere, anytime, for any reason. So I think there are a lot of nuanced things to do. I don't know the one answer, but I think part of the answer is convincing people like you it's a problem. So you got me heated, and I'm sorry. I'm directly commenting toward your comments. I feel like you're prepared for this. I think you need to read a couple of those books on the table. Specifically, maybe Stolen Focus would work well for you because this is a problem.
Well, maybe I can push back on that because I would definitely love to. But, first of all, thank you for coming at least. Whether your comments are personally targeted at me, that's totally fine. My job is to at least advocate for things that I think would be useful in society that may also not be talked about, especially here in a very, Chittenden County in general in South Burlington, a lot different than when I was growing up or before when I was growing up. But I will definitely say that I think in general, what my kind of philosophy, kind of revolves around is the fact is that, this issue, I brought this up earlier, but maybe we could talk about this some more, is that, in general, when there's the problems that we're having effect on with, especially with young people, even when it comes to me, when I'm looking on social media or whatnot, is that problem when they're getting addicted to social media, for example, that specific thing? Is that because of these social media platforms and digital technologies and video games? There was so many I could go on and on about video games, and then when they were talking about how it's going to be disruptive for society, you know, it's a bad example, GTA 5 kind of era, etc. This is going to harm society, and we never really saw what that actual outcome was, that people are going to, you know, go to the streets and cause harm, etc. And for a lot of things, I think in some ways, in a lot of ways, it's the same conversation here, is that, you know, the government should get involved to stop it, for example. But we're not even talking about what got us to that point of where people are so you know, getting manipulated so quicker when it comes to these social media places that are coming from outside of the actual platform themselves, that I think we should talk about some more. And I kind of brought up a few of them. You know, I think, you know, a lot of families in general, it's so hard for them to be able to afford to live here, and it's causing them to spend more time at work, less time at home, for example, with their kids, and teaching a lot of good values, for example. And I know when I was talking about personal responsibility earlier, maybe some people would try to, you know, frame me and say, like, I'm trying to say that it should be, you know, individual kids, it's up to the individual kids to, like, you know, use their own personal responsibility with these platforms. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that personal responsibility in general, I think across society and a lot of places, are just not being incentivized. And I say that across a lot of our, you know, just institutions in general across Vermont. But well, I will say, you know, mentioning this article just lastly, very well read on that about the litigations that are going on, and that, you know, these platforms can still be held accountable by underways by people like us who are, you know, I'm not a politician at all. I mean, I'm just a regular citizen that is looking at our state and looking at the outcomes of what's been going on. We're paying $28,000 a kid. We're paying $74 million, $73.9 million for South Burlington High School education system every single year. I grew up into this platform, and yes, we have high graduation rates, but does that say that we're having, you know, good educational outcomes when all the other kids leave because they don't want to stay here? I think that, you know, kind of definitely reflects upon our historic legislature that has been in the state of Vermont. Now, I don't have time to talk about it all because I've already spoken for 5 minutes here on this point. But if you look at my website, I think I answer a lot of those questions. So, I would love to talk to you after,
And
maybe some more, actually.
I have like a bookend comment that is also a compliment. Clearly, as a product of the South Burlington education system, you're a debate aficionado. You're a role model for young people. Like, something went right. And I think we all came together because we care. We want to do hard things, and we want to invest in our future. So many of the economic themes that have come up on the campaign trail are about that, because we believe in our future, and we believe in our traditions and our families and our infrastructures and our communities. And I think IRL hosting this forum is a good example as how no one entity, no one individual has to figure it all out alone. There are resources for schools who are ready to implement the phone-free schools legislation, which is going to be coming up here in about 75 days, or no less, 45 days, sorry. And working together, listening, building on community strengths is where we need to go with this. And we cannot fail on protecting our young people. That's why we have guardrails on the side of the road. That's why we have seat belts. That's why we vet products for safety. And I stand behind that 100%. I'm really thankful for this opportunity. Thank you.
Closing comments. So thank you for all coming here tonight. And I'm running not because I want to impose my point of view on what I think needs to happen in Vermont, but I see this as service. I don't come with all the answers. I am coming to understand the issues and do my best to represent what I think the majority of my constituents, and also what my conscience tells me. My conscience and my constituency is what guides all of my actions in the legislature. And just know that if I don't have an opinion on something, I really do my best to keep my mind open. I got to say, when phone-free schools first came around, I had questions. I talked to Representative Arsenault, called me. She spoke to me about a lot of things. I'm glad that I ultimately voted for it. I think it's the right thing for the schools. I had concerns about logistically how to get it done, how to impose things on schools. They were saying no more unfunded mandates, and so just working through those questions. So I see my role as just asking the right questions and doing my best to serve the state and the communities that I care deeply about. So that's why I do this. I'm not trying to change Vermont. I'm just trying to serve it, and that's why I hope to earn your vote. And I'd be happy to chat more after this if you'd like to talk.
Ginny, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much, Laura and Angela, for putting this all together. I know there are probably others as well, appreciate the time. Uh, Prevention is key to our public health outcomes. And this is a tough nut to crack. There's no question about it. It's about human behavior. It's about psychology. It's about neurodevelopment. It's about education. It's about corporations, all of the above. I was very pleased to have the phone free schools uh, bill in my committee. And I realized as we looked at it, and my committee unanimously supported it. And we said, look, this belongs in the education committee. We sent it there. And miraculously, working together with House members like Angela and others who are very much engaged in this whole area of digital technology. And I include the person who's running for Senate in Orange County in that. She's does an amazing job. Um, you know, we are making progress, but it doesn't happen alone, and it doesn't happen in isolation in Montpelier. It happens when this type of discussion takes place and more. So your ideas for solutions, I welcome. In particular, how can we move in the direction of public health? Does it mean there's another checkoff point for Dr. Hunt for primary care about how much time do you spend on your digital products? So, thank you all. And I would look forward to serving you. I ask for your support. So thanks a lot.
Well, yeah, I guess my last comment wasn't very, conclusionary, but I will say, I do appreciate, first of all, the opportunity to be here again. This is, a really good opportunity to talk about the issues, because at the end of the day, I think, because I do, you mentioned greatly, thank you, that I come from a debate background. And really, I think what, our country was built on, what our government is built on, and what society is built on is the, talking about ideas, proposing ideas, and trying to have people reckon with them. Because at the end of the day, there's only a certain amount of senators, only amount of certain representatives when it comes to passing bills in our legislature. But we have way more individual people and citizens that exist in this state that are also very well read, that have come here prepared, that are, very knowledgeable on the issue. When it comes to also, people running for office, for example, I feel like it's the job of, that person to at least promote those ideas that those people are also, thinking about, and might not be represented necessarily as well as what we might have in the status quo. That's kind of the world that I'm coming from, especially in South Burlington here. I'm definitely not of the majority in a lot of different ways. But I definitely see issues that happen. And maybe, this might not be the biggest issue, necessarily that's going on in the state, obviously. It is a tremendous issue for young people, and a lot of different issues for young people. But I will say, just to close off, again, for someone that's been here, that has grown up here, that has lived here, and wants to live here, whether we want to talk about property taxes or education, X, Y, and Z, I definitely want to have the opportunity to have my family grow up here. And in the current day status, I think a lot of people will say that they do not want to. I think there was a recent UNH article and polls that came out and said that, and you're seeing this all over social media. More and more people are seeing this. And I think people are really trying to say, hey, this is what I'm seeing, and I want to actually advocate for it. And because it's so important, because it's all about how do we have a good system come into place. And that doesn't get done without debate. And so that was kind of my final thoughts there. So I love to have, whether it's heated conversations, personal attacks, I don't care about that stuff. It doesn't really bother me. I'm a Vermonter, and hopefully try to be a good person every day as I grow up older. I'm trying to become more wise and more knowledgeable, obviously. So I'm really excited to be on this journey, especially as someone young. And I do recommend people to look into more issues, especially if you're a young person, whether you're in the audience or not. Learn about the issues, because it is extremely important. So thank you.
Yes, and I will say thank you to all of you, all of the candidates who are here, and especially all of you in the audience participating. As you were saying, and as all of you have said, like we have to do this together. I really believe in the need for collective action around this issue, and pretty much every issue, but in some ways this issue more than others, because we're talking about what have very quickly become entrenched norms and beliefs. And in order to uproot those norms, it takes a lot of us kind of like digging, poking, questioning. You know, a lot of this happened as I was just writing something today, and I realized these norms were adopted before any of us really realized what was happening. And now some of us realize what's happening, and not everyone sees it, and that is okay. There is always
Well, I
time.
experience it, so I'm
We
you know,
all
I'm in the middle of it.
we all experience
We all
it.
do.
We all experience it. So I just want to thank everyone, and if you have, especially for staying later, thank you so much. Obviously, there's great interest in this topic. Come and take a look at the tobacco timeline, and so that we know what we don't want to have happen. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Take care.